Hi, Alma. Welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
going to talk to us a little bit, I think, from your experience as a chaplain in a care home, and particularly what you've experienced working with people who are dying and at end of life.
That's right.
So, would you like to tell us first of all a little bit about what you found to be really important when you're working with people near end of life?
I find that being with people is really important to them. That sort of presence, even if it's not, even if they don't particularly believe in anything, if it's just somebody that has no faith, they more often than not want to feel that presence of another person with them, talking to them, perhaps holding their hand, just that personal touch, that personal expression of being with someone, I find is really important. It
Mm,
gives people a sense of, well, a sense of not being alone and a sense of comfort very often as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
We can share, we can share really last minute things.
yeah, yeah.
I shared a psalm with a gentleman, which really touched him, and the last words, some of the last words he ever actually said were, "That is so beautiful,"
Ah.
and to witness that is just such a
Mm,
wonderful thing.
yeah. And I guess that's not always with people of faith either, is it?
No, no, very often people, they don't want to have anything to do with faith. The family make it quite clear that this
Mm,
person has no
mm,
interest in anything to do with faith.
mm. But you have a story of someone.
Yes, there's a gentleman that I've not been there at the care home very long. I was very new to the job, and I'd been told by one of the care staff that this gentleman who was younger than me, he was in the process of dying, and would I spend some time with him? Though, as I say, I didn't have any faith, but I could still be that person with him. So I sat with him, and he was sort of in and out of consciousness, really. But So I sat with him for a while, and then I thought, well, I'll read to him because I do know that hearing is one
Mm,
of the last things that goes. So we had a bookcase full of books, so I just plucked one out of the bookcase, and I knew he was a keen cyclist. He'd got skin cancer, which was why he was dying so young, because he'd been out and about in all weathers on his bike. I assume, I don't know.
mm,
But I plucked this particular book, and I read. Oh gosh, it must have been a couple of hours to him. It was a
mm,
lovely moment, very meaningful. And then eventually he took his last breath and died, and staff came in and took over from there. But when I spoke to family members shortly after this daughter especially, she was the one that I think she was the only relative left actually. So
mm,
we had lots of lovely conversations with her. Obviously very upset, and I explained what I'd done, that I'd read to him for the last couple of hours of his life. And she asked me which book was it, and so I told her it was a book about somebody that had cycled around the world.
mm.
And she just stopped for a second. It still gives me goosebumps now. She stopped for a second and she said that was his all-time favourite book. And
Ah,
so by
mm,
chance or by whatever,
mm,
that was the one that I plucked off the bookcase to read to
mm,
him.
mm,
It was a wonderful moment.
mm,
Sad, but a wonderful moment too.
mm. You've mentioned families there, and of course, a lot of your work must have been with family
Mm.
and care home staff. Were there any particular issues that arose in your work there?
Yes, there's something that comes up time and time again, to be honest. There's this idea that some people know when they're ready to go. They
Mm,
know when they're ready to die. They've had perhaps a long life, and they've had their families, and they are ready to, especially people with faith, they're ready to move on into that next part of the
mm,
journey. And they've said this to me quite a few times. And I've had a couple of ladies, and one in particular, that told me, I want to go. I'm ready to go. I'm ready
mm,
to. She was a Church of England lady. We used to share lots of prayers, so I knew her quite well, and also the family, who there's lots of daughters, extended family, and they were called out at all times of the day and night to go and see her because staff thought she was going to pass away any moment. So they'd be called out at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they'd come and see her, and she'd be sort of in and out of consciousness, and then they'd sit with her for a few hours. They'd go home to get changed, have a rest, and then come back first thing in the
mm,
morning. And often, more often than I care to think, actually, they'd come back and she'd be wide awake eating breakfast with the assistance of one of the
mm,
carers. So in that way, it was difficult for family because they were they'd gone through hell and back
mm,
with all this, and Mum equally went through hell and back with the idea that she was going to die. She wanted to die, and she couldn't. And part of it was because the care staff were so caring. They were Christian people on the whole, who, not necessarily my theology, but theirs was life at any cost, life at, always strive for life, even for those last few minutes. So if somebody was really quite poorly and they went into this unconscious state and then woke up again, they would be ready with something to eat to give them strength again, which wasn't always good. Well, I'm not speaking for them, but they told me that the family said that for them it wasn't the right thing to do. And one lady, I remember in particular, she said about her mum, she said, please just let her go. But then she was told, well, hearing, as I said earlier, is the last thing to go very often. So it was a very difficult situation, but it was all done through love.
Yeah.
The love from the carers to the dying resident, and from daughters and sons to their dying parent. None of it was done through a bad way of being, if you see what I mean.
And I guess you as chaplain, you just have to try and hold all those conflicting feelings and emotions.
That's right.
Hold the space for people.
Yeah. You can't have the kind of opinion where you can say, well, actually, you have to just let people speak and just hold that space and try and be that middle ground between different family members, because families can be fractious as well, and also the staff and the carers that were doing the best to keep somebody alive and keep them going.
Yeah. And in your experience, is there anything you've developed or that you've been able to do to help family members and care home staff in their grieving?
Yeah, there's of course the formal thing is the funeral, which obviously previous times that was a very important thing to do, but also to enable staff to say goodbye and family members to remember in a more informal way. I've developed remembrance services, and it used to be for each person that had died. Obviously, with the current situation, that's been impossible. But normally, then I would get the families round and would have tea and or coffees and soft drinks and food. The chef would make us food, and it was just a lovely way to share memories. And of course, there were tears and there was laughter, and people had that space, those few weeks or a few months, to think about from the funeral itself to when we could have this get together. And so other stories popped up, or other funny stories from other family members. So that they were vitally important, I felt.
Yeah. So you had laughter even amongst the grief and
Even
the pain.
amongst the tears, there was laughter.
Yeah. You said something about in previous times, and obviously we're talking now in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. How has that impacted on the work you do with residents and families, particularly in terms of death and dying? You've lost people to COVID?
Yes, we have. We've had a very difficult period, especially around April, May time. It was very difficult for staff. We had some staff that were ill in the organisation. Some staff died as well, obviously because of the COVID. Residents died too. So it's been difficult for me because my job would be to be around people in those last moments.
And were you able to be with people in those last moments?
No, not really. If I went to, say, last rites, or as it used to be called, often I couldn't do that in the way that I would have normally done, which would sit by them, hold their hand, do the sign of the cross on the forehead. I had to keep 2 meters distance in full PPE, the mask, the visor, the gloves, everything we had to wear. So obviously I couldn't go up to them, and I'm perhaps stood at the doorway while they're in bed. Often they couldn't hear me because of hearing problems. So that was very difficult. Where normally I would have been sat with them and holding them.
Yeah.
Yes.
And families, could they visit at end of life?
It's discretionary, I believe, at the moment, but there have been times when people have just come to the windows to wave goodbye to family members, which was just absolutely heartbreaking.
And that's been the last time they saw them?
Yes. We do try to get permission for them to come to do that 2 meters, but there has been times when it's been very difficult, and the worry is that people become super spreaders.
Mm.
That you'd see one resident that's got the illness, and then you may go to speak to somebody else, or even just passing somebody.
Yeah.
We didn't know much about the illness at that time, so it's been a very difficult place to be.
Okay, and you're continuing your work and ministry in that, Alma, so we send you our best wishes and our prayers in that work.
Thank you.
Thank you.